Thanks.
Well, I get a chance to ask you questions, and I probably wouldn't have had. You have an impeccable sense of time on the screen. Were you a professional musician?
I was a college musician. I guess I was a professional musician. I got paid tens of dollars at times to play my guitar in coffee houses when I was 16. Yeah, I do have an education in classical music, actually.
Okay. This character is an incredibly interesting character. Did you think of him as, and the film for me, besides being kinetically so exciting and creating the most mammoth performance anxiety, even if you aren't a performer, this moral issue at the center of, do you push someone too far, even if you think they're talented, and is this sadism, and what leads him to sabotage potentially his entire career to get revenge on this kid or to bring him out? How did you think of him? Did you think of him as a psychopath?
If I say no, will you hate me? Yeah, I did, yeah. But you also, I mean, I also need to be able to understand what motivates someone, and where something comes from. And fortunately, Damien, who apparently wasn't aware that there's sometimes traffic in New York, put down on paper a character that was, that was really fully realized, and I felt like all I had to do was, lift him up and put him on the screen.
Okay, let's take questions. Look at John, the god of the question caller.
Congratulations, J.K. Simmons. You just said that you thought he was a little bit of a psychopath. Do you see him as sadistic? Is he a repressed homosexual with his homophobic language? And is this kind of inspired by any teachers you knew with your own characterization here?
Yes, borderline psychopath. Yes, homophobic, but not necessarily repressed. We actually had we shot most of a day. By the way, this is another Damien shout out here. 19 days we shot this movie. Yeah. I mean, it was crazy, and he's a child, and it's really a remarkable achievement by him. Yeah, there were scenes we shot in my apartment of me seeing my solitary existence there actually was this really nicely ambiguous photograph of a woman and a child that as I played the whole movie, that they were part of my backstory, my wife and daughter, and it was never, well, it's not in the film, but even in the version that we shot, it was never really referred to beyond that. So, was there a second part to your question? I'm sorry that I did not answer. Yes, a psychopath. No, not a homosexual. Yeah. There was. I certainly had some teachers who were perfectionists and coaches. There was nothing that I was consciously drawing from. I mean, as I look back on it, and a couple of position coaches in high school football, and one choir director. There are elements that sort of found their way onto the stage, yeah. Or the screen. It's a screen, right?
I think we have certain teachers right next door at the Juilliard who would fit the bill.
No.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Right here. I don't think I've ever cried before at a drum solo, and each time I've seen this film, it has brought me to tears because of the emotional life of the characters. You're a serious person in life as well as a very good actor. This film is as much about teachers as it's about anything else. Teachers get a very bad rap today, and I wondered what you think playing this kind of teacher it means to teachers and to students and to parents and to politicians about the role of a teacher?
Well, certainly Fletcher's not a role model, but you know, he is brilliant. And my father was a teacher. He taught public school when I was a little kid, and then university at Ohio State and the University of Montana. And he was a musician also. My sister is a professor. You know, teachers. I couldn't agree more about teachers being an underappreciated, undervalued, underpaid segment of society, right up there with nurses and firefighters. And again, I'm digressing and forgetting exactly what the nature of the question was.
What do you think framed this character on the screen, a film that will be widely seen, will do for the role of a teacher, and how will you support that?
Well, I don't know that it will be helpful. And I honestly, that's an interesting question. I'd never thought of that. And that's something that I will try to mitigate, you know, going forward, because you know, the old saw, those who can't do teach, and Fletcher, you know, makes that reference to himself. You know, I was never interested in, you know, being you know, the world's greatest jazz pianist. I was interested in, you know, being the mentor, being the teacher, being the tormentor. So it's easy for someone to just view this film and at face value see that, a guy who can't do, so he teaches and terrorizes people. And I think it's much deeper than that. And my own personal regard for the profession of teaching is very high. So I need to think about how to address that in the future. Thank you.
Before I ask a question, I have to make a statement. I agree with the person who said they cried because the drum solo got to me up here.
Oh,
But the thing about it is that it's a real story about real people playing real instruments with real music, and that is something that's so rare. So now the question part, how on earth did everybody prepare for this film to be on the same page or chart, as it were?
Well, it starts out with Damien I mean, the movie is, you know, loosely, I don't want to say autobiographical, but kind of based on real experiences that Damien had as a high school musician. Miles was Damien's choice from the very beginning to play Andrew, and Miles has a background as a drummer, as a rock drummer, which of course jazz musicians disdain. I think it's in the film, right? The thing about you can always play rock and roll. If you're not good enough, you can start a rock band. So for Miles, the big challenge was, to, learn the left hand and adapt his technique, and he worked very hard on it. When Damien and I first met, he tried to assuage any concerns I had about playing a conductor by saying, we'll have an expert come in, and you can take lessons and blah blah blah. And I said, well, I actually, I studied that in college. At one point I thought I was going to be Leonard Bernstein when I grew up, and so I actually have that background, although I don't play piano very well, so I had to practice a lot for that very simple little ballad. But then, one of the great joys of this film was, 95% of the musicians that you see playing are musicians playing, not actors faking it. And some of the guys that had more significant lines and things in the film were faking it. But when we were shooting, I was up there waving my arms around, and they were making some great music. Of course, it's sweetened, and it's all redone in the studio. But there was some great music, and sitting there playing with that quartet in the jazz club. Even as a really, really, really bad piano player, there were brief moments when I just settled into the pocket and just talk about tear. It was deeply moving for me to work with musicians of that caliber and sort of relive that part of my youth, and after having taken so many left turns in my career and ended up doing this, it was really fun to work with musicians like that, and to be doing that every day at work, and or screaming at people, which are two of my favorite things.
Hi, over here. Hey, I was wanting to know whether when you made the short film, whether there was the idea of making it into a feature, and what the process was of taking that 10-minute performance and transferring it into 2 hours.
Yeah, the script first came to me from Jason Reitman. Thank you, Jason Reitman, for everything. He sent both scripts to me, the feature script and the short. And the short was really just distilled from the feature with the plan in mind of making the short to generate, capital for the feature. The short film was basically the scene of Andrew's first day in studio band and playing Whiplash for the first time, and the chair and all of that. And it was brilliant on the page. And I went and met Damien, and then they asked me to do the short, and obviously we were all hopeful that we would get to make the feature. It was a different actor playing Andrew in the short, because Miles just couldn't be bothered to make a short film. He's like a movie star. And that was, that was part of the, and the other actor was a wonderful actor, Johnny Simmons, a very, very different take on the character. But we did the short in 3 days, and then they took it to Sundance, and it made a bunch of noise and accomplished its purpose, which was to generate abundant.
Last
cool,
year.
cool. Yeah, no, it's a great little film. I mean, really, and that was when I realized, when I met Damien and saw that he was, 11 years old, it's a real leap of faith to go with a technically a second-time director on a film like this. I mean, I knew he was a writer. I knew it was a brilliant script, but I certainly had concerns about working with an adolescent, making. Whether he would be able to do everything that that the director needs to do, and from the very beginning, his hand, including in the editing room, was unerring, and just the word brilliant is overused, but I about both Reitman and Chazelle, I do use that word.
Yes, I had 2 questions for Damien, but maybe you know the answer to one or both. Andrew's idol is Buddy Rich, and Damon was a high school drummer, and I'm wondering if his idol when he was a high school drummer was Buddy Rich. And the second question, that again maybe is wider, is that those of us who knew and followed Buddy when he had his big bands in the late 60s and 70s know and remember that he had a volcanic temper that was full of fury, that matched yours and it even at times exceeded yours. And I'm wondering if you knew, or if you know, that whether your character was in part or in whole really based on Buddy Rich.
I did hear the Buddy Rich rant that's on YouTube, but actually I don't remember now if that was before or after. It was definitely after we shot the short. I think it was between doing the short and the feature, which was about a year, a little more than a year. Buddy Rich and Joe Jones are the 2 names that kept coming up. And I remember Buddy Rich as, the sweetheart that would come on Carson, when I was a kid, and I'd watch him chat with Johnny and then go over and, do his thing on the drum set and think, how do you do that with only 2 hands and 2 feet? And, and he was a very engaging and charismatic guy. And it wasn't really until sometime during the making of the short or after the short that I was aware of Buddy's reputation as and that it was well deserved as being a tyrant and a perfectionist and a guy who just wouldn't take less than great without fighting for it. And without, beating the crap out of people, figuratively, verbally.
I could just throw something in for Damien, who I know quite well and have talked to about this film. And all of you, if you haven't seen his first feature, Guy and Madeline on a Park Bench, which he made for about, $25,000 on 16 millimeter film when he was at Harvard, it is a joy. but this film is huge leap up on every level. He was a drummer in high school, and he told me the story about how for 1 year, this high school in Princeton got this very, very demanding teacher, although not a psychopath, and they became the #1 high school band in the United States. They won the competition. But he said that every day before he went to school, when he had band practice, he used to throw up. So, I mean, he is a fantastic perfectionist in every way.
JK, right here in the middle. Your performance is as much amazing as it is haunting, and one that I certainly will not forget in a long time.
Yeah, we're basically done, so take off. Thank you.
It's the closest I think we've seen on screen to Arlie Ermey's fantastic performance in Full Metal Jacket, as close as I think that we can get in a very, very long time, if ever, since that performance. Can you talk about getting into character, and if that's kind of something that, if you looked at his character maybe to kind of get in character, it's something that's so aggressive and so violent, and as your character here?
Before you
yeah.
answer, everyone, this is Damien Chazelle.
Thank you. Traffic.
He was going to do a drum solo, but the kid didn't make it through the traffic. Yeah, we actually, there were, Full Metal Jacket goes to Juilliard jokes on set. And yeah, that's certainly a valid comparison. It sounds overly simplistic or disingenuous or something, but honestly, to prepare to play this character, all I did was read what Damien wrote and look at Miles, and who's just such a slappable little bastard, and be Terrence Fletcher. I mean, I don't want to. I don't know. I don't have a smart answer for that question. I just lifted it off the page to the best of my ability, and Damien, gave us a little bit of freedom to mess with what was on the page as well, which is a lovely thing for a young filmmaker or young writer director, to have the generosity and the healthy ego to be able to deal with actors messing with his words, because everything he wrote was wonderful, but then the fact that he gave us a little room to occasionally step off the reservation, do our own thing, was really fun as well. Basically, all of the slurs and insults that I do in the movie, I made up. Right? You didn't really write any of those.
Right,
Yeah.
right. We'll keep that perception going.
Damien, I was at Sundance, and I didn't get a chance to see your film initially, and so that's why I felt so compelled to come to the screening today. Can you talk about what the ride has been from Sundance to now, and just with all the press and the film really getting high acclaim?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird actually, because at this point we've spent more time kind of on the road with the film than we spent making it. So it's this whole kind of other life that, in a way, I mean, you hope to have with a movie. So it's all kind of gravy. I remember taking, when we took it to Sundance, it was we'd done a short film beforehand with JK to sort of raise money for the film beforehand, and took that to Sundance. So it felt like it had been kind of a blur of a year to sort of get the money together and make the movie in this kind of mad rush and then take it there. So the only time I had to actually kind of simmer down and think or reflect was the kind of few weeks after Sundance, after we premiered the feature. It's a weird thing, I think, to make a movie in such a kind of sustained, kind of aggressive burst of sort of sleeplessness and just kind of we just had such a crammed schedule that we never had time for second guessing or kind of overthinking things.
Or
which I
second
think
takes, or
second take. No, Miles would say that differently because he likes to complain about how many drumming takes there were, or slapping takes. So I think but it was the kind of thing where it's sort of, in a way, I think it probably helped the movie. A movie like this is probably benefits from not overthinking it too much.
Miles, by the way, is in Boston for Jeter's last weekend. That's why he's not here. Okay. So what does that tell you about Miles?
Oh, that's because I was told he was working. That's what they
Working,
call work.
yeah. He and his dad are watching Jeter.
Yeah. That's typical Miles. Yep.
Mr. Chazelle, I was wondering, how did the music you picked shape the trajectory of the story?
Mr. Chazelle. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think you've had your moment. So now they want to ask me questions. So
I have a question for you as well.
no. I mean, a lot of this movie was kind of almost autobiographical. So I mean, it's a lot of the charts. I guess there's two charts in the movie that are pre-existing that we licensed. Those are Whiplash, the title chart, and Caravan, which he plays at the end. Both of those charts and those arrangements were things that I played as a drummer in a sort of similar jazz orchestra. And so I kind of, in a way, Whiplash was always the song that I hated the most, because it's the most kind of, it's sort of a song designed to screw with drummers in terms of how it kind of outlays its time signature changes. And Caravan was the song that I loved playing the most, because it's originally kind of was composed as sort of more of a ballad type thing, but this is a fast big band arrangement that always kind of gave me the most sublime sort of ecstatic feelings as a drummer. So those two twin poles to me were kind of the initial starting point, and then everything else was composed originally for the movie by Justin Hurwitz, who is a composer I'd worked with before, and by Tim Simonek, another composer, and because we had Whiplash and Caravan as starting points, the rest of the music could kind of follow that kind of mold. And then I used the music as kind of, to storyboard and to do animatics to and everything. So it helped having, it was like doing a musical. It's kind of, you had every musical number figured out beforehand, audio-wise, and then we could figure out the imagery and the editing to follow that, so that by the time we were on set, we knew exactly where the camera would be for every note and measure of music.
By the way, Damien's next film, because he is so business savvy, is a full-on musical. What the hell are you thinking?
This is what my agent told me to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Damien, well, first of all, amazing movie, goes without
Thank
saying. I'm interested, like, when you were a drummer, I assume that you were also a film lover, and I'm wondering if you sort of had visions in your mind of what, these shots of the drums and the way that it's edited together. I guess my question is, how does your drumming actually inform your editing style and your visual style?
I think I think it's. I knew that I wanted this to be a movie that would live in close-ups a lot, and so just kind of sitting there at the drum set, remembering the things that I saw very close up with my eyes, my hands bleeding, the sort of blisters kind of slowly growing and then growing bloody, the sticks breaking, drum heads being battered and looking like, kind of almost like weird sort of Cy Twombly paintings or Jackson Pollock paintings, like on drum heads, like just stuff like that I remember kind of looking at very close up. So I knew that the movie needed to, for the most part, live in that, with that sort of language. So once you decide that, then that dictates a certain editing style, dictates a fast editing style that's going to be a very kind of punctuated series of close-ups that are then either going to be in counterpoint to the music or set to the music. So it all kind of started from some of the imagery I wanted to capture, and then the rest followed from there. But again, as with like the musical numbers, I mean, it helped having the musical language decided on beforehand, because everything could then follow from there. I just knew I didn't want the musical numbers to feel like we had just set up 3 cameras and just kind of haphazardly rolled and then found it in the editing room, that there had to be a certain kind of design to it and rhythm to it, that they had to feel like action sequences that had been sort of pre-designed to music. So.
This is for both Mr. Simmons and Mr. Chazelle. In the yellow. Hi. There's an interesting energy that runs through the film, this kind of like macho, and they said sadistic, this patriarchal energy that is in some ways kind of very fragile because it's so aggressive. So it has to like, you know, I have to be in charge. And there's the scene there talk about how good job is like one of the worst, you know, things to say in the English language. But I was thinking about why, and maybe, I don't know, did you think about this? What is the connection between coaxing virtuosity and violence? Like, why is violence always the go-to way in coaching virtuosity? Like, did you think about that? What does that mean to you? What do you have to say?
I mean, I guess I'll jump in first. I mean, that to me was the central question, and it was. It didn't. It started more with just my personal experiences, having had a conductor who sort of, you know, made a point of terrifying his students and his players, and that, you know, as a drummer, that my motivation for being a good drummer was born out of fear. And which in a way seems so antithetical to what art should be. So that it sort of started from me trying to think just to grapple with my personal experiences and wonder whether they kind of said anything broader in terms of other art forms. Certainly jazz has a long and storied tradition of hostility among musicians, cutting sessions, you know, birthing great musicians, exclusivity, birthing things like bebop and free jazz and so on and so forth, and also tyrannical band leaders from Harry James to Benny Goodman to Buddy Rich. So it's a very big part of the tradition of that music, and again, it just kind of makes me, it poses, I think, a lot of questions, especially with a music like jazz that's kind of renowned for its sense of freedom and its sense of the whole music itself being a kind of fuck you to authority. The fact that there's such an authoritative streak in a lot of big band jazz, at least, to me is kind of paradoxical and sort of interesting.
Yeah, that was the great dichotomy in Fletcher that jumped out to me, was that, you know, he is in this jazz world, you know, this sort of free form world, you know, where we improvise and, you know, and but he is, you know, a martinet in many ways. I mean, the way he shoots the you know, the first scene in Studio Band, you know, before I walk in, and, you know, I mean, all the musicians, I mean, the faces of you know, the sax player just like, oh, please, dear God, don't look at me or ask anything of, you know. And I think that in people of that ilk, you know, that it comes from a passion, it comes from a commitment to greatness and to creating great art, and then it comes from a frustration at the fact that we're human beings and we don't achieve perfection, and some people handle that better than others.
Hi, over here. It was the scene for me that's perhaps the hardest to watch is when the violence escalates from the yelling and the emotional abuse to the actual slapping, to the physical abuse, and it's hard to watch that scene and not think of Bobby Knight, for example, where people lay hands on a player physically in that case. I mean, from the side of people who are experiencing on the end of that abuse, it does sound like it wasn't physical for you in your case in music class, but what's the culture among people who are dealing with that kind of behavior in class? I mean, it took a long time for Bobby Knight, for example, to be exposed because people didn't want to speak up. What's the, do you talk amongst yourselves? When have they crossed the line? How does someone get the bravery to say, this is far enough, this is too far?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that kind of since the script was first written, certainly a lot of this stuff has come more to light. The kind of there's been much more of a spotlight shown on abuse in education and bullying in education, and rightly so. And I think that you know, in I don't know, in my case there was something. Certainly, my experience was more emotionally and psychologically kind of, you know, sort of oppressive or damaging or whatever than physically. But I had musician friends who were sort of in the band with me who then I burned out pretty quickly and I sort of stopped playing drums. But friends of mine who went on to music school and sort of went on and then wound up kind of, you know, being sort of consultants on this movie, and so kind of every little bit of stuff in the movie is sort of culled from kind of bits of experience, either of my own or in those cases, in physical cases, from stuff they would tell me, and it's again kind of the question to me of sort of that. I think it's in a way since you end the movie with a kind of moment of sort of artistic, a breakthrough for Andrew, you have to make everything else kind of as horrible as possible, because otherwise you're kind of answering the question already. And so it was important that once we decided that the movie had to end on some kind of an artistic high point in terms of Andrew's perfection as a drummer, it was important to us that, and it was something we talked about with producers and financiers and everything, that JK's character not be, that if he was going to be compromised at all or softened at all, it would literally skew the whole movie the wrong way, and that you had to kind of have those two. You had to have something as horrible as Andrew's solo is great. Otherwise, there's not enough of an argument.
Thank you for the movie. Thank you for the performance,
Thank
for
you
the
so much.
direction.